God, who is our eternal rock and our Redeemer. We pick up in the middle of the second missionary journey of Paul. He has traveled from Antioch to Tarsus, through the mountain pass into Derbe, up through Asia Minor, across the little strait, into Macedonia, or Greece. Thessalonica was last week, and down by sea he comes to Athens. Now Athens is a very well-known city today. Many of the cities that we talk about still exist. If they're not currently alive cities or active cities, they are rubble or remains, and you can find the leftovers of the former city. Next slide. You'll see here a very familiar sight. This is the Acropolis with the Parthenon sitting on top of it, perhaps the most famous site in Athens. Athens, in Paul's day, had passed its heyday. It was already beyond its peak. It had been the capital in the Greek Empire, but now the empire had moved and Rome was the capital. It had been relegated to a second-class city. It was still well respected because of its art and culture and history. Many people came to visit it. Many people came. It was a center for culture and arts and thinking, creativity. So it was still a very important city, but just not as large or powerful or wealthy. And so notice, this is the Acropolis. This little bald mountain over here we're going to be talking about in a few minutes, and over here is the marketplace. You'll notice all of the modern city is grown up surrounding this center part of the city. Next slide. Closer look at the Parthenon, the Acropolis. Next slide. Here's the Acropolis from below. You can see the towering walls here, the retaining walls, with the Acropolis sitting on top of it. You can see it from anywhere in the city. Very prominent site, the center of their worship, the Temple of Athena on top. You can see the temple here in the foreground. Just to give you some perspective, you'll notice the person right here. So, you see these things, you're like, oh, that's pretty neat. But then you notice the people walking around the bottom, and you start to understand the size. Now look up here, and you can't see any people up there because they're too small to see. So we'll go to the next slide. Here's a little close-up shot. You can see a flag flying high on a pole up here, but still no people. Next slide. This would have been how Paul approached the city. When Paul landed in the dock, he would have landed behind where we currently are, and this road would have been the central road leading right up through this house into the Acropolis, which you can see right behind them. It would have been a broad street with the buildings kind of set back, so you had a nice, beautiful view of the peak of the city, the crowning jewel of the city, the Acropolis. You'd be able to see it, and then you could march all the way from the dock, all the way straight, right up to the temple to worship. Notice we have a couple travelers down here. One of them you might recognize here on the left. Somebody who's sitting here in the sanctuary. Next slide. So, this is overlooking that marketplace that I mentioned when we were looking at the Acropolis. Over here you see a reproduction of what one of the buildings in the marketplace would have looked like. But this would have, in all likelihood, been the marketplace where Paul was speaking. There was an area over here that was specially designated for teaching. But he would go out and he would talk to the people and share with them what Jesus is doing, what God has done through Jesus. Next slide. This is that marketplace area, the reconstruction of the marketplace area. It would have looked something like this, probably a little bit more hustling and bustling with more people. They would have had shops set up in between these pillars, selling their wares, little vending shops, clothing, food, all sorts of things like that. Notice the beautiful pedestrians walking around here. Lovely people in this area. Next slide. So, we come to verse 18, where they're starting to discuss, and they invite him to go to something called the a.mpg. The a.mpg was basically a census board, a board that really examined new ideas. They were the head thinkers of the town. This was a town known for its philosophy, its discussion, its debate. It was a town known for talking about ideas. Now, in a town known for talking about ideas, this was the cream of the crop, the people who talked about the ideas. So these were the brains of the brains, if you want to think about it that way. And they met on top of this hill, right here in the foreground, And in the background, you'll notice the Parthenon, the Acropolis, sitting up here. So this is that bald mountain, that bald hill that I pointed out earlier. It's called Mars Hill. It's where the Areopagus met to discuss the philosophy of the day. It's where Paul went to talk to the philosophers and explain what Christianity was all about. Next slide. Again, this is that first picture we see. This is the Parthenon, the Acropolis, and this is Mars Hill, right here. Notice that's where Mars Hill is, and just down the hill is the marketplace. So all these things, these are the two settings for today's story. They're the two settings that take the two places where things happen. Paul goes to the marketplace day after day, talks about Jesus, and then eventually he gets attention, and he's taken and said, come on, we want to take you to our census board. And they take him up here, and up to the top of this hill, where they have their discussion, which is recorded in the book of Acts. Next slide. These are the steps carved out of solid rock that Paul would have walked on. This was the stairway up to the top of Mars Hill. It was quite a thrill to walk in the exact spot where Paul would have walked. I made sure to hit each one of the steps, just in case he chose to skip steps. I wanted to make sure that I hit the same steps that he hit. But it was quite a thrill for me to know that I was walking right where Paul walked. He probably walked up those steps and put a hand on one of those walls as he was walking up, talking to the person who had invited him to speak to the Areopagus, kind of explaining the idea. The Greek, the Athenian would have been explaining to him what the Areopagus did, what they were about. They would have been talking on the way up. You could just see them in their robes, kind of shuffling up the steps there, their togas, and getting to the top, right where I was there. I wonder if he stopped and turned around. There was no cameras back then, so he probably wasn't taking a picture, but so Paul was right there. And it always thrills me when I can pinpoint. Because a lot of times they say, this may have been, or this probably was. There's no may have been about it. Paul was here. He was on those steps. That's always exciting for me to know. Next slide. This is from the top of the Acropolis looking back at Mars Hill. You can see the people spotted all around the hill. So that's where the Areopagus would have met. That's where Paul would have had his discussion. He probably would have stood up on one of these rocks with the people surrounding him, listening to him, and talking. So next slide. These are all of our areas put together. This is the marketplace. From the marketplace, looking back at the Parthenon, you can see Mars Hill here on the right. What we're going to learn from today's lesson is evangelism. How to do it. Paul sets up a beautiful model. Gives us several good points, several key ideas that we need to keep in mind as we're telling other people about Jesus. All right? He's going to demonstrate for us what a good model of evangelism is all about. Next slide. So, the first thing that he does is he gets to know them, he goes to them, and he gets to know them. Alright? So he went to where? He went to the synagogues each week, but he was also in the marketplace. What's in the marketplace? That's where they have their chariot repair shops. That's where they sell their dates and figs, their grocery stores. That's where they have their computer repair shops. That's where they have their sales and marketing. That's where they have their businesses. That is Paul going to them. But also notice, he says, I see that you are in every way very religious. I walked around, I looked carefully at your objects of worship. So Paul not only went to them, but he got to know them. He knew what they were about. He studied them. He got to know them on a personal level, started to talk to them, befriend them. This is an excellent principle, that before you can tell somebody about Christ, you need to know where they are. If you walk up to someone and say, let me tell you about Jesus, and you don't give them a chance to respond, they may already be a believer. You say, you need Jesus, I know. You need him for salvation, I know. You need him to God, I know. Know where your person is, where your friend is. Know them. Have a relationship with them. Before you try to tell them what they need to know what they know. Start where they are. Next slide. Start where they are. So go and know, but start where they are. He says, I even found one with an unknown God, a description to an unknown God. Start where they are. Maybe the person is struggling with faith, and they need you to give them answers. But maybe the person has just experienced something terribly painful.